welcome to Talk Treatises.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So today we are jumping into a deep dive on a text that I think people sort of vaguely know about, but rarely actually sit down and read.
Yeah, they know the concepts, but not the source material.
Right, exactly. And just to set the ground rules for the listener, this is a strictly text-based professional philosophy and classic literature discussion.
We aren't doing the whole historians say this or quoting a bunch of modern secondary sources.
No, yeah, we were looking right at the text and the facts. And the text today is a big one. It's Marcus Tullius Cicero and his work, The Republic, or De Republica.
Which is really the bridge, right? I mean, it's the bridge between Greek philosophy and the practical reality of Rome.
And eventually it shoots straight into the minds of the American founding fathers. You really can't understand the concept of natural law or why you have a Senate without understanding this specific book.
No, you really can't.
So I want to give the listener a one-sentence thesis for what we are doing here today.
Let's hear it.
A republic is not just a gathering of people, but a partnership based on justice and common interest, which is best preserved through a mixed constitution that balances the three primary forms of government.
That's the whole ball game right there.
It really is.
Yeah.
But before we get into the heavy philosophical arguments about justice and political decay, we have to set the stakes.
Because the context here is everything.
Right. Cicero isn't writing this from some ivory tower. He's not a tenured professor just speculating on political theory for a journal.
He is a man who is literally watching his world burn down around him.
So paint that picture for us. What is the historical context here?
Well, it's roughly 54 BC in Rome, and this is the late Republic, which is honestly just a polite way of saying state failure.
It's an absolute mess.
Yeah, the institutions are technically still there. You know, there is a Senate, there are consuls, they hold elections.
But the norms, the unwritten rules that actually made those institutions function have just completely evaporated.
Exactly. You have the first triumvirate holding the reins. That's Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus.
Basically three warlords.
Right. Three warlords who essentially decided to just bypass the Roman constitution entirely and run the empire through a private, informal agreement.
It's an oligarchy masquerading as a republic.
Precisely. And if you look at the streets, it's even worse. You've got Clodius and Milo.
Gang leaders.
Yeah, they are acting as political operatives fighting literal street wars. Mm-hmm. The Forum is frequently awash in blood.
The Forum is supposed to be the center of civic life, and it's a war zone.
And bribery isn't just common, it is the prerequisite for holding office. The mos maiorum, you know, the way of the elders, that code of honor that held everything together is just gone.
And standing in the middle of all this chaos is Cicero. And his position is fascinating because he is a new man, a novus homo.
He doesn't have that ancient aristocratic lineage.
Right, he doesn't have the family name. He clawed his way to the top on pure intellect and his ability as an orator.
He was a former consul, and he actually saved the state once before from the Catiline conspiracy.
Which was basically an attempted coup by a bankrupt aristocrat.
Right.
But now he's marginalized. The triumvirate has sidelined him. He's forced into this sort of political retirement.
So what does he do? He picks up his pen, he writes this text to try to stem the tide of tyranny.
He wants to revive that veneration for the ancient Roman constitution. It's almost like a break glass in case of emergency manual.
That's a great way to put it. He's trying to resurrect the ghost of the ideal state before the body of the actual state dies completely.
And the text itself is structured as a dialogue modeled on Plato. But unlike Plato, who builds this hypothetical city in the sky that never existed, Cicero roots his dialogue in the past.
Right, he sets it in the garden of Scipio Africanus the Younger.
About 75 years before Cicero is actually writing the book.
Because that was the golden age in his mind. It's before the Gracchi brothers started pushing land reforms and broke the political peace.
It was a time when Rome was powerful and united. And the dialogue opens with this incredibly striking metaphor. They were discussing a celestial phenomenon.
The parhelion. People are reporting that there are two suns in the sky.
And of course, today we jump right to atmospheric refraction or something. But for them, this triggers a massive philosophical debate.
Because one character, Tubero, is totally obsessed with the physics of it. He wants to know why it's happening.
But then Laelius, who represents practical wisdom, just snaps at him.
Right. He essentially asks, why are you gazing at the sky, worrying about two suns when we have two senates and two peoples dividing the republic right here on Earth?
It's such a devastating pivot. He's calling out the paralysis of the intellectual class.
Exactly. Studying astronomy while the streets are on fire. It perfectly frames the central tension of the book, which is the conflict between the active life and the contemplative life.
Because there was a really strong pull from certain philosophical schools, especially the Epicureans, to just withdraw from public life.
Their argument was that politics is a dirty game run by madmen, so the wise man should just retreat to his garden and seek peace of mind.
Just hide and live.
Hide and live. But Cicero, through the character Scipio, launches a massive assault on this idea.
He argues that virtue isn't just an art you possess like some trophy on a shelf. It's a faculty that has to be used.
And the absolute highest use of virtue, the best life a human can live, is in founding or preserving a state.
He even says it's the closest human virtue comes to the divine, which is a huge claim.
It's a massive theological claim. The statesman is closer to the divine than the philosopher in the garden.
But he has to deal with the obvious objection, right? Politics is incredibly dangerous. You can get exiled or assassinated. Cicero himself was exiled.
He knows the risks intimately, but his counter-argument is flawless. He says, yes, politics is dangerous, and yes, wicked men often run the state, but that is precisely why good men must serve.
You don't do it for glory, you do it for self-defense.
Exactly. You serve to prevent being ruled by the wicked. If the good men retreat, the bad men take over.
Apathy is basically suicide.
If you don't run the republic will run you over.
So they establish that action is required. But before they can fix the republic, they have to define what a republic actually is.
Which brings us to the famous definition, res publica is the thing of the people, the public thing.
But we really need to define people here because Cicero is a lawyer and he is very rigorous with his terms.
Right. A people is not just a mob. It's not just a bunch of humans standing in a field together.
It's not a gang of pirates.
No, a multitude only becomes a people when they're associated by two specific things. First, a common acknowledgement of right or law.
Let's unpack that. A common acknowledgement of right.
It means we agree on the rules of the game. We have a shared legal framework. If I think theft is a crime and you think theft is a valid career choice, we aren't a people.
We're just two individuals who are probably going to fight.
Exactly. The second requirement is a community of interest.
Meaning we are in this together.
Right. We share the benefits and the burdens of the state. If the state only exists to extract wealth from you to benefit me, we don't have a community of interest. We have a master and a subject.
And Cicero connects this to what he calls the social principle. He rejects the idea that humans only form groups because we are weak and afraid.
He's following Aristotle here. Humans are naturally social creatures. Even if we had unlimited food and perfect safety, we would still build cities.
Because we genuinely crave the company of our own kind. The state isn't some artificial imposition, it's a natural expression of who we are.
Exactly. So once we have this natural community, this res publica, how do we organize the government to run it?
This is where we get into Book One's breakdown of the three simple forms of government. And Cicero isn't just making a pro and con list. He's doing a deep psychological analysis of power.
He starts with the monarchy, rule by one, the regal form.
Which has a very obvious psychological appeal. It's the family structure writ large.
It's paternal and it's efficient. In a crisis, you want one decisive leader. You don't want a committee debating what to do. You want one guy making a call.
But the downside of the pathology of the monarchy is that it deprives the citizens of participation.
It infantilizes them. Under a king, the people have no political agency. They are subjects, not citizens.
So what's the next form?
Aristocracy. Rule by the best, the optimates.
Which honestly sounds great in theory. You want the wisest and most capable people making the big decisions.
And Cicero is sympathetic to this. He considers himself an optimate. The idea is that wisdom should guide power.
But it has a fatal flaw, too.
Yes, because if the best men make all the choices, the multitude has no liberty. And for a Roman, liberty didn't just mean doing whatever you want. It meant having a share in public power.
If you aren't participating, you aren't free. Which leads to the third form, democracy. Rule by the people.
The popular form. The psychology here is all about liberty and equality. Everyone gets a voice.
But Cicero is incredibly critical of this.
He actually argues that absolute equality of rights is inherently unjust.
Which is a heavy statement. Equality is unjust. Walk us through his logic there.
His logic is that people are not equal in their merits, in their virtue, or in their contributions to society. If you treat a wise statesman and a complete fool exactly the same, you are flattening the hierarchy of virtue.
You're ignoring excellence.
Right. And to Cicero, treating unequal merits as equal is a supreme injustice. It destroys the incentive to be great.
But the real terror for Cicero isn't just the flaws of these three forms, it's that they are violently unstable. They don't stay still.
This is the concept of anacyclosis, the cycle of degeneration.
The slippery path. Yeah. Because every simple form has a virus built into it that inevitably destroys it.
It's a wheel of doom. The good king inevitably becomes a tyrant. Absolute power corrupts the paternal figure into an abuser.
And when the tyrant becomes unbearable,
the best men, the aristocrats, rise up and overthrow him. But over time, they get comfortable and corrupt. They stop ruling for the state and start ruling for their own faction.
They turn into an oligarchy.
Exactly. And they hoard the wealth and abuse the people until the people inevitably revolt.
And they set up a democracy,
which then slides into mob rule or anarchy. The crowd becomes irrational, they ignore the laws, and chaos takes over.
And people hate chaos more than anything.
So they look for a strong man to restore order. A new king rises and the wheel just keeps turning.
It sounds incredibly bleak. Is there any way out of the cycle?
There is. You have to hack the system by blending the forms together. The mixed constitution.
A fourth kind of government.
Right. You take the executive power of the monarchy, the deliberative wisdom of the aristocracy, and the liberty of the democracy, and you lock them together in a system of mutual tension.
In Rome, this translated to the consuls acting as the regal element, the Senate as the aristocratic element, and the popular assemblies and tribunes as the democratic element.
It's a system of checks and balances designed specifically to create stability and stop the cycle of anacyclosis.
And it sounds so modern to us because it heavily influenced the structure of modern democracies. But Cicero makes a huge point in Book 2 about how this didn't just happen overnight.
He contrasts Rome with Greece. In Greece, you had these mythical single lawgivers like Lycurgus in Sparta or Solon in Athens, who supposedly sat down and wrote a perfect constitution in a day.
But Rome wasn't built by one genius in a room.
No, Rome's constitution was organic. It was forged over centuries and generations through trial, error, and crisis. It's collective wisdom.
And to prove this, he takes us on a historical tour, starting with the actual geography of Rome. He's doing a bit of geographical determinism here.
He heaps praise on Romulus for choosing the exact site of the city. He says it was divine foresight to put Rome on a river, the Tiber, but not directly on the coast.
And I found that fascinating. Why the hostility toward the sea? Most global superpowers are built around port cities.
Well, Cicero and Plato felt the same way, believed that maritime cities are inherently unstable and corrupt.
Because of the trade.
Trade brings in foreign goods, but it also brings in foreign morals, languages, and strange customs. It makes the population flighty. They're always looking at the horizon, thinking about leaving instead of defending their land.
They become a society of merchants instead of a society of soldiers and farmers.
Exactly. He argues that Carthage and Corinth fell precisely because they were maritime powers. Rome's location inland gave it agricultural stability, but the river gave it just enough connection for prosperity.
So Romulus sets up the Senate, the fathers, then we get the parade of kings. Numa comes in and tames this warlike population using religion and peace.
Tullus Hostilius establishes military discipline. Ancus Marcius expands the territory. Tarquinius Priscus brings in Greek culture.
But I really want to stop and drill down on Suvius Tullius, because this is where Cicero gets highly technical and to modern ears incredibly elitist.
We're talking about the census?
Right. Servius Tullius created the Roman census, and today a census is just counting people. But in Rome, it was about assigning political status based on property.
Servius organized the citizens into voting blocks called centuries, but these centuries were absolutely not equal in size or power.
Let's run the numbers for the listener because it's wild. The wealthiest citizens, the first class plus the knights, and a few highly skilled artisans were given 98 centuries.
Total. 98 voting blocks.
And the entire rest of the population, the middle class, the poor, the landless plebeians, how many centuries did they get?
95.
So the rich have 98 and the rest of the city combined has 95.
And to win a vote in the assembly, you needed a simple majority of the centuries. The magic number was 97.
So if the wealthy class voted together, the election was literally over before the poor even got a chance to cast a ballot.
Yes, the lower classes frequently didn't even get to vote because the wealthy had already reached the majority threshold.
And Cicero completely defends this system. He thinks it's brilliant.
He does. His explicit argument is that suffrage should not be in the power of the multitude.
How does he justify that within a res publica?
He believes that the people who have the most to lose, the landowners and the wealthy, should have the greatest say in the direction of the state. It's a weighted voting system based on your stake in the country.
His fear is that if you give the man with nothing The exact same voting power as the man with everything. The man with nothing will just vote to confiscate property.
It's an anti-redistribution mechanism built directly into the electoral math. To Cicero, wealth is a proxy for competence and stability.
So it's highly rigged, but it provides that crucial stability. Until we get to the final king, Tarquin the Proud.
Tarquin shatters the system. He ignores the Senate, abuses the prominent citizens, and rules purely by force.
He becomes the tyrant. And Cicero makes a very subtle point here about the end of the monarchy.
He points out that the moment Tarquin became a tyrant, the people ceased to exist.
Because the community of interest was broken.
Exactly. So expelling the king wasn't just a political rebellion, it was an act of restoration. They were resurrecting the public thing that Tarquin had destroyed.
And that takes us right into Book 3, which shifts from the historical structure to the philosophical soul of the state.
The debate on justice.
Because a mixed constitution is just machinery. It needs an engine, and that engine is justice.
Cicero models this section on a real historical event when Greek philosophers came to Rome. He has a character named Philus play the devil's advocate against justice.
And Philus goes hard. He channels Carneades, the Greek skeptic. What is his primary attack on justice?
Philus argues that justice is entirely a human invention, a social construct. It is not natural.
And his evidence is that laws change across borders.
Right. He says if justice were a force of nature like gravity or fire, it would operate the exact same way everywhere. But what is considered a horrific crime in Rome might be considered a virtue in Gaul.
Therefore, it's just local custom.
Furthermore, he argues that human beings only agree to be just out of weakness.
This is the idea that we sign the social contract simply because we are terrified of being murdered in our sleep.
Exactly. If you gave a man the ring of Gyges, the ability to be invisible and commit crimes with zero consequences, he would do it. We are only good because we lack the power to be bad safely.
That's a cynical view of human nature. But his most dangerous argument is about the state itself, the conflict between prudence and justice.
This is pure realpolitik. Philus looks around at the massive Roman Empire and says, did we acquire all of this land by being perfectly just?
Did we politely ask for it?
No, we got it through conquest, violence, and subjugation. He argues that political prudence, the survival and expansion of the state, absolutely requires injustice.
If Rome was perfectly just, they'd have to give the empire back and go live in mud huts.
Right. A perfectly just state would be a weak state that eventually gets conquered by a ruthless neighbor. So injustice is a feature of national greatness, not a bug.
It is a incredibly persuasive and brutal argument. So how does the character of Laelius counter this?
Laelius defends justice by introducing the doctrine of natural law, and this is the part of the text that fundamentally shaped Western thought for centuries.
He says there is a true law, vira lex.
And this true law is right reason in agreement with nature. It is universal, unchanging, and everlasting. It applies in Rome just as it applies in Athens.
So human legislation doesn't actually define what is right. If the Roman Senate passes a law making murder legal, Laelius would say it's still illegal under natural law.
Absolutely. Because God is the author and the judge of this law, and you cannot alter it or repeal it.
And then Laelius takes us back to the very definition of the Republic from Book 1.
Right. He says, if a people is a multitude bound by a common sense of right, then a state that abandons right is no longer a state.
A tyranny or a mob rule isn't just a badly functioning republic. It is literally not a republic at all. It's just private power exercised over hostages.
And this concept was incredibly influential later on.
St. Augustine picks this up centuries later.
He does. Augustine actually uses Cicero's own logic to argue that pagan Rome never was a true republic because it lacked Christian justice. But Cicero's main point is that morality and politics cannot be separated.
Because if the state acts immorally, the trust that binds the citizens together dissolves.
And without trust, the community of interest collapses.
So if the machinery is the mixed constitution and the fuel is natural law, who's actually driving the vehicle?
That is the subject of Book 5, The Ideal Statesman, the Rector Republicae.
Now, Book 5 is very fragmentary. We only have pieces of it, but the outline of this figure is clear.
Cicero describes him as a tutor and steward of the Commonwealth.
I love the word tutor there. It implies he's leading through education and example, not just coercion.
He uses the analogy of a ship's pilot constantly. The passengers might own the ship, but the pilot knows how to read the stars and navigate the storms.
And what makes this pilot qualified to steer?
Pure virtue. Specifically practical wisdom combined with intense self-control. He has to be totally immune to the seductions of money and power.
Cicero emphasizes the concept of shame.
Right.
Verecundia,
Yes, the ideal statesman must fear moral disgrace more than he fears physical punishment or death.
And his private life has to be absolutely spotless.
You cannot be a degenerate in your own household and expect to govern the state. The household is the microcosm of the republic.
But there's a really tragic irony hanging over this whole section.
Because of when he's writing it, 54 BC?
He's writing a job description for a savior while the republic is actively dying because no such man exists.
He looks at Pompey and sees military greatness ruined by vanity. He looks at Caesar and sees brilliance poisoned by absolute ambition.
And he probably looks at himself and thinks, I could have been this man if this system hadn't broken down.
It's a eulogy. He's mourning the type of leader Rome used to produce but can't anymore.
And because this ideal statesman can't expect any real reward on earth, he'll probably just be exiled or assassinated. Cicero has to offer him a cosmic reward.
Which brings us to the stunning conclusion of the work, the dream of Scipio, Somnium Scipionis.
This part survived independently through the Middle Ages because it's so beautifully written. Scipio Africanus the Elder appears in a dream to his grandson.
He takes him up into the heavens and shows him the entire cosmos. He points down at the earth and shows him how tiny and insignificant the Roman Empire actually is in the grand scheme of the universe.
It's just a dot in the void.
But then he tells him that for those who preserve and protect their country, there is a guaranteed place in the heavens where they will enjoy eternal happiness.
It's the ultimate incentive structure.
Yeah.
Serve the state, fight for justice, and you literally become divine.
It's the only way Cicero can justify the massive sacrifice of the active life. Duty is the pathway to immortality.
It's a beautiful and somewhat desperate vision. Now we've covered the historical context, the political structures, and the philosophical arguments.
It's time to test the text.
Yes, it is time for the thought experiment segment. We are going to take Cicero's concepts and stress test them in some outlandish scenarios.
Ready?
And a quick disclaimer for you, the listener. The following scenarios are for entertainment and educational purposes only. They are outlandish, but they are logically consistent applications of the text.
So what's the first one?
Thought experiment 1. The Red Republic.
Let me guess, we are in space.
We are on Mars. A colony of 10,000 people living in a sealed dome. It's a zero-margin environment. If someone leaves an airlock open, everyone dies.
So a community of interest based purely on biological survival.
Exactly. Now, the colony started out as a pure, direct democracy. One person, one vote on everything. But anacyclosis kicked in.
The cycle of decay. Let me guess that the mobs started voting themselves too many resources.
Yes. The colonists voted for shorter work shifts and higher oxygen rations. The reserves got depleted, life support started failing, and riots broke out. Mob rule.
The people became a tyrant to themselves.
So the administration decides they have to implement a Ciceronian mixed constitution to save the colony.
How do they structure it?
First, the regal element is an artificial intelligence called the governor. It manages the life support grid. It operates purely on the natural law of physics. It can't be bribed, and it has an absolute veto over anything that threatens oxygen levels.
So a flawless philosopher king running the infrastructure.
Then the aristocratic element is a senate of engineers. The nuclear techs, the botanists, the experts, they draft all the critical laws regarding labor and resources.
And the popular element.
A general assembly where everyone can vote, but only on social issues. Cafeteria menus, interpersonal disputes, entertainment.
They separated the existential decisions from the social decisions.
So here's the twist. The AI governor analyzes the colony and realizes that equal voting in the assembly is a threat. So it implements a Servius Tullius census.
Oh, wow. It ties voting power to caloric output.
Exactly. Right? The AI determines that a reactor technician who produces 50% of the colony's power should have a vote weighted 10 times heavier than an artist who just consumes oxygen but produces no technical value.
It recreates the Roman class system based on technical utility.
The question is, would Cicero consider this Mars colony a just republic?
Honestly, yes. Cicero would look at that and absolutely nod in approval.
Even with the massive inequality, the dehumanization of the non-technical people.
Especially then. Because Cicero would argue that the reactor tech has a vastly greater stake in the physical survival of the state. If the tech fails, the republic literally suffocates.
So giving the tech more power is just acknowledging reality.
Yes. Cicero would argue that the absolute equality of the old direct democracy was actual injustice because it treated unequal contributions as equal and nearly destroyed the state. The AI's hierarchy preserves the public thing.
But what about the artist? If his vote is basically worthless, is he still part of the people? Doesn't he lose his liberty?
Cicero might say the artist is a passenger on a ship in a hurricane. His feelings of oppression don't matter compared to the survival of the vessel. It's harsh, but it perfectly fits Cicero's weighted logic.
All right, let's move to thought experiment 2, the visible soul.
Let's hear it.
This tests a debate in Book 3 between prudence and justice, the Phyllis versus Laelius argument.
Right, statecraft versus morality.
Imagine a near future where we invent truth tech. Augmented reality contact lenses that can perfectly analyze micro-expressions in history to show you a person's actual virtue.
So you can see their true moral character.
Yes. If a person is genuinely honest and just they glow with a golden aura, if they are deceitful and unjust, they have a dark, shadowy aura, no one can hide.
The ring of Gyges in reverse.
Exactly. Now apply this technology to the government. Laelius and Cicero would argue this is a utopia.
Because shame would instantly deter crime. The voters would only elect people with golden auras. We'd finally get the ideal statesman.
But Phyllis would argue this technology would cause the immediate collapse of the state.
Because of the prudence argument.
Right. Phyllis says that to run a massive global superpower, you have to commit necessary injustices.
You need spies to lie and steal secrets. You need generals to authorize strikes. You need diplomats to negotiate with monsters.
So under the AR lenses, every single highly effective political leader or intelligence director would have a dark aura.
The public would see that the people keeping them safe are fundamentally unjust.
They see the sausage being made.
Yeah.
And the public revolts. They demand a golden aura leader. They elect a pure saint.
And what happens to this?
The saint refuses to spy, refuses to lie, refuses to order drone strikes. And within a year, the country is conquered by a rival nation that doesn't use the lenses.
Phyllis's prophecy comes true. Perfect justice leads to national suicide.
So the deep question for you, the listener, is this. Does a republic actually require the ability to hide its own necessary injustices to survive?
Does the community of interest rely on a foundation of hypocrisy?
If we saw the true moral cost of our geopolitical stability, would the republic shatter because we'd realize we aren't bound by right, but by complicity?
That is a chilling thought. It implies the dream of Scipio is an illusion that only works if you don't look closely at the gears of power.
And maybe that is ultimately why Cicero's republic fell. Not because they lost the blueprint, but because the blueprint is impossible to build in a fallen world.
It's the ultimate tragedy of the idealists surrounded by realists.
But Cicero ends with a vision of heaven, because he insists we still have to try.
Even if the cycle is inevitable, you have to put on your toga, go to the Senate, and argue for justice.
Because the only alternative is silence, and silence is the death of the republic.
Absolutely.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into De Republica. It's an incredibly dense text, but the foundational ideas are still driving our world today.
We definitely pulled the engine apart on this one.
Thank you for listening. Keep exploring the texts, look at the stars, but don't forget to guard the state.
Until next time.